Hello, I'm Lee Brown and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Belgium launches an investigation after 15 drones fly over its military base as new drone scares hit Europe's airspace. Ukraine may have to wait longer for US long-range missiles as Washington struggles with a government shutdown. And Armenia says it has agreed with Azerbaijan to reopen transport links as part of ongoing peace efforts. Belgium has launched an investigation after 15 drones were spotted over its Elsen-born military base near the German border on Thursday night. Authorities stated that an assessment of the situation was underway, but confirmed that the origins of the drone are unknown. The sighting is part of a wave of drone disruptions across Europe. Similar incidents hit Denmark and Norway, fueling debate over a drone war on Europe's eastern flank. The most serious case involved nearly 24 Russian attack drones in Poland, triggering a multi-million euro emergency response.
I want to congratulate Maya Sandu on the...
Remaining on the topic, Munich airport has reopened after a drone sighting near its airspace forced a temporary shutdown on Thursday night, grounding multiple flights and causing widespread disruption. At least 17 flights were cancelled, affecting nearly 3,000 passengers, while another 15 were diverted to nearby cities. Federal police said the drones were seen twice after dark, but due to poor visibility, details about their size or origin remain unknown. Several European airports have faced similar disruptions in recent weeks, with authorities still investigating the source of the drones. Looking elsewhere in Europe, a Finnish court ruled it doesn't have jurisdiction to prosecute the captain and 2 senior officers accused of breaking 5 undersea power and internet cables in the Baltic Sea last year. The suspects were charged with dragging the anchor for about 90 kilometers along the seabed on the 25th of December. The 3 crew members denied the charges. Finland says the ship is believed to be part of Russia's shadow fleet of tankers. Helsinki District Court said it is not possible to apply Finnish criminal law to the case. Now Ukraine may have to wait longer for US long-range missiles as Washington struggles with a government shutdown. Sources say the US Tomahawk missile shipments to Ukraine could be unlikely.
As the war grinds on in Eastern Europe, Ukraine is still waiting for long-range missiles. But that wait could be extended as Kyiv's biggest arms supplier, the United States, faces its own political deadlock. Discussions about US military support for Kyiv were frozen after the government shutdown on Wednesday. The Trump administration's plan to send Tomahawk missiles to Kyiv now hangs in the balance. According to a US official and 3 sources, current inventories are already committed to the Navy and other operational needs. The official said the US may look into allowing European allies to buy other long-range weapons and supply them to Ukraine, but Tomahawks were unlikely. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also expressed uncertainty about the delivery. Washington had previously signed a $500 million aid package for Kyiv last month, the first since Donald Trump returned to office, using funds from NATO countries. The move comes after the Kremlin said on Thursday that if the US provides Tomahawks to Ukraine, it would trigger a new round of dangerous escalation between Russia and the West.
Over in Germany, it's 35 years ago that the country officially reunified after the world watched the Berlin Wall coming down, marking the end of a division and the beginning of unity. The day is a reminder that a huge barricade once split the nation, dividing families and friends.
Every year on the 3rd of October, Germany marks Unity Day, the day when a divided nation officially became one. It is a moment to reflect on the country's history, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the reunification that reshaped Germany. To understand why this day is so important, we need to go back to the years after the Second World War. Imagine a city where neighbours, friends, even families woke up to find themselves cut in two by concrete and barbed wire. That was Berlin in 1961, and it is the story that makes German Unity Day. After the Second World War, Germany was divided into 4 zones, each controlled by one of the Allied powers: the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Berlin, though deep inside the Soviet zone, was also split into 4 sectors. By 1949, 2 new states had been created. In the west, the Federal Republic of Germany, democratic and market-driven. In the east, the German Democratic Republic, a socialist state under Soviet influence. But the GDR had a problem. Its own people were leaving. Between 1949 and 1961, more than 2.5 million East Germans fled, many of them doctors, engineers, teachers, and students. By the summer of 1961, thousands were crossing into West Berlin every single day. The brain drain threatened to collapse the East German economy. So, the authorities acted. On the night of 12th to 13th August 1961, East German forces rolled out barbed wire and blockades around West Berlin. Streets, rail lines, even family gardens were cut in two. In the weeks and months that followed, the makeshift barrier became a permanent one. A wall of concrete, reinforced by electrified fences, watchtowers, guard dogs, and landmines. By the 1980s, the Berlin Wall stretched 155 kilometers in total, 43 kilometers slicing through Berlin itself, and the rest circling the western half of the city. It was actually a system of fortifications, parallel walls, floodlights, the so-called death strip in between, and armed patrols under orders to shoot anyone who tried to escape. And yet, thousands still risked it. Around 5,000 people made it across, through tunnels, in homemade balloons, even smuggled in cars. At least 140 lost their lives in the attempt, though some counts put the number closer to 190. Each escape and each death was a reminder of how far people would go for freedom. For 28 years, the wall stood as the concrete face of the Cold War. But by 1989, change was sweeping Eastern Europe. In East Germany, mass demonstrations demanded democracy. The Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, refused to send in tanks, unlike his predecessors. Then came 9th November 1989. At a press conference, an East German official, Günter Schabowski, stumbled over new travel rules, making it sound as though the borders were open immediately. That evening, thousands of East Berliners surged toward the checkpoints. Overwhelmed, confused guards stepped aside. The wall, the barrier that had defined a generation, was suddenly open. Crowds from both sides climbed the concrete, embraced, and began chipping away at it with hammers and chisels. Within days, pieces of the wall were being passed from hand to hand as souvenirs. Less than a year later, on the 3rd of October 1990, East and West Germany formally reunified. Since then, German Unity Day has been a national holiday. Each year, a different federal state hosts the official program of exhibitions, concerts, and debates. The date chosen is important too. While the wall itself fell on the 9th of November 1989, that day also carries a darker memory. The Nazi pogrom against Jews in 1938, known as Kristallnacht. To avoid overshadowing that history, Germany instead marks reunification on the 3rd of October, the day the legal and political merger was complete. As Germany marks the 35th anniversary of its historic reunification, debates over lingering political and social divides continue. Yet the Berlin Wall remains a powerful symbol of the nation's journey toward unity and the challenges it has overcome.
Now, French President Emmanuel Macron arrived in Saarbrücken to join celebrations marking the anniversary of German reunification. He was greeted by Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz. The day is considered the country's most important public holiday. Emmanuel Macron called it a great honour to be invited, saying he was humbled by the invitation. He added that it wasn't just Germany that unified 35 years ago, but Europe as well. to the latest update coming out of Britain. Greater Manchester Police say one of the 2 people killed in yesterday's Manchester synagogue attack was mistakenly shot by officers during the armed response. Zainab Farjazadeh is in Manchester with more.
Greater Manchester Police have provisionally admitted that their own officers were involved in one of the deaths at the Heaton Park synagogue. In a statement, the force said a Home Office pathologist had determined that 2 victims, including one of the deceased, suffered wounds consistent with a gunshot injury. The Chief Constable acknowledged these injuries were, in his words, an unforeseen consequence of the urgently required action taken by my officers. Police also confirmed the names of the victims: 53-year-old Adrian Dolby and 66-year-old Melvin Kravitz, both from the local Crumpsall area. The attacker, identified as Jihad al-Shami, was shot dead by armed officers just 7 minutes after the first emergency call on Thursday morning. However, it is understood that al-Shami was not in possession of any firearm. Investigators say al-Shami, a 35-year-old British citizen of Syrian descent, came to the UK as a young child and was granted British citizenship in 2006. His family have posted a statement on Facebook in which they fully distance themselves from al-Shami. As part of the investigation, 2 men in their 30s and a woman in her 60s have been arrested on suspicion of preparing and instigating acts of terrorism. Police continue to work at the scene, and with tensions running high, Greater Manchester Police say more officers will be out on patrol across the city. People from the local area continue to leave flowers and messages close to the scene, and Prime Minister Keir Starmer has also visited the scene of the attack. Ultimately, the revelation by the Chief Constable will surely lead to more questions over the next few days. Zainab Farjazadeh, News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Now Europe turns its eyes to Prague. The Czech Republic votes in a general election that could bring former Prime Minister Andrej Babiš back to power. The outcome will signal whether Czechia stays firmly aligned with the European Union and NATO, or whether it will increase Moscow's influence in Central Europe.
In Prague and across the country, polling stations are open as Czechs choose all 200 members of the lower house of parliament. Voting runs through Saturday, with parties needing at least 5% of the vote to enter parliament under the proportional system. The front-runner is 71-year-old billionaire and former Prime Minister Andrej Babiš. His populist ANO party is campaigning on tax cuts, higher wages and calls to halt support for Ukraine. But despite leading the polls, ANO is unlikely to secure a majority, making coalition negotiations crucial. Prime Minister Peter Fiala's pro-Western Spolu coalition is calling for continued alignment with the European Union and NATO. The far-right SPD is pushing for a referendum on leaving the EU, while the far-left Stachilo movement opposes NATO and rejects military aid to Kiev. Opinion surveys put ANO at around 30 to 32%, Spolu at about 20%, with several smaller parties such as the Pirates, Stan and Motorists for themselves expected to play a decisive role in shaping the next government. Polling stations close on Saturday afternoon. Preliminary results are expected the same day, with near-complete figures later in the evening of October 4th. The outcome will decide whether Czechia remains firmly anchored in Brussels and NATO or takes a turn toward a more Moscow-friendly course.
Welcome back to A News. We return now to some of our top stories, from today's drone sightings over Munich and Belgium to President Putin's remarks at the Valdai conference and this week's EPC summit. To help us unpack what this means for European security and Russia's role, we're joined by Alexandra Filipenko, political expert in Vilnius, Lithuania. Alexandra, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I just want to start with, to what extent are the drone sightings above Munich and Belgium a further test of European and NATO resolve?
Well, I must say that using this word test, I suppose that this is not test, this is actually the actions of the Kremlin. This is the Kremlin's doing, at least if it is confirmed that this comes from the Russian side. So this is something more than just testing. These are the actions of the Kremlin, and we've heard a lot have been said about Russia moving on to, let's say, maybe not attacking, but moving into trying to attack, or at least, again, testing the NATO countries after they get all they want in Ukraine. But as we see, the Kremlin is not winning the war. Quoting Keith Kellogg, the special envoy of President Trump, if Putin was winning the war, he would have been in Kyiv. He would have already overthrown the government. So we are now seeing that Russia is not winning the war. We cannot say that they're winning, but we are seeing some actions above the skies of Estonia, above the skies of Denmark, above the skies of Norway, above the skies of Lithuania, where I am currently, or above the skies of Poland. And we are seeing it right now more and more, way more active. And all those drones and the planes, may I remind you that the planes above Estonia were 12 minutes in the airspace of Estonia, and this is quite a long time. So we are now seeing the way more active Kremlin, way more active Russia's side, and of course we've heard from Russia's side during the UN General Assembly, from the Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov, and from President Putin yesterday at Valdai Forum. Of course, we've heard that these are not Russian drones. These are not Russian planes, and this has nothing to do with Russia. But if it actually has to do with Russia, then this is more than a test of NATO. These are already actions where Russia wants to see how far can NATO countries go in securing the airspace of the countries that are on the outskirts of NATO, right by Russia's border.
You touched on it just at the end there, but I do want to push the question of why. It's almost like Russia is waiting to be provoked, like a carrot and stick, waiting for Europe to bite and accelerate the conflict. What's your assessment of this?
Absolutely, this looks like that, and we've seen Russian planes, for example, in Turkey's airspace. It happened in 2015, and a lot of people remember about that situation when a Russian plane flew into Turkey's airspace for not more than 17 seconds, and it was shot down by Turkey. Of course, after 10 times, Turkey's military have asked this plane to turn around and move back into Syria's airspace. So we've seen when some countries are ready to actually respond to Russian planes coming into their airspace. And right now, NATO countries are not showing the resilience. And I think that we will learn way more after NATO summit, NATO Ministers of Defense summit that is going to happen in Brussels on the 14th and 15th of October. Of course, they will discuss that, but it looks absolutely like Russia is provoking NATO countries in order to get the response, because yesterday Putin talked about the response, that if someone is trying to attack Russia, then the response is going to be grave. And we understand that any planes above NATO countries are, of course, in NATO airspace, so there can be no response. But if something happens to the planes on the border of NATO airspace and the border of Russia, then there might be something happening. And of course, Russia would like to say that NATO is attacking Russia. And at least that's what President Putin and the Kremlin in general has been talking about for years and years. They've been talking about NATO dreaming of attacking Russia. And of course, we haven't seen anything like that. And right now, this looks like trying to poke NATO.
If I may, I just want to draw your attention back to the Valdai conference, where Putin made remarks saying he has no plans to attack NATO, of course, and given Moscow's action in Ukraine. Obviously, we don't know how credible these are. But Putin also singled out Germany's military build-up. What does this tell us about Moscow's reaction? Is it concerned about Germany's military ramping up?
Of course, and in general, Putin and in general Russia doesn't want to see stronger European Union military. They don't want to see EU coalition of the willing becoming willing not only to protect Ukraine or at least help Ukraine, but also ready to protect themselves, protect the European Union. We are now seeing in front of our eyes the European Union is reimagining itself from being a merely political alliance or an economic alliance into becoming a military alliance, because that's what we've seen, at least from the coalition of the willing. And right now, this policy shift is some kind of a, maybe I wouldn't say danger, but a concern for the Kremlin for sure. They don't want to see that. They don't want to see more military at the border of Russia. They don't want to see German military, for example, in Lithuania, and there is a buildup in Lithuania. They don't want to see that, and they see it as a threat to themselves and as a threat to Russia in general. So that principle of no NATO on Russia's borders, being guided by that principle, Putin actually attacked Ukraine at the first place because he wanted to have this buffer zone between Russia and NATO countries. But of course, it only led to bordering countries like Finland becoming part of NATO.
Of course, we touched on the military unification of NATO and the EU there, but I do want to push us back to the economy of it all. Do sanctions on Russia's shadow fleet of tankers actually cut off funding for Moscow's war effort? Is that credible?
The economists, of course, would put it better, but this is a plan that is working, although Russian shadow fleet, as we are seeing it right now, is quite successful. It is working quite successfully, and Russia is finding ways to go around the sanctions and go around through third countries. Of course, as we've heard a lot coming from the United States, that India and China are basically the sponsors of the war because they are buying Russian oil. But we cannot say enough about the Russian shadow fleet. And the Russian shadow fleet is the greatest sponsor of Russian economy and of Russian military machine. So this is what really influences when this shadow fleet is being cut off, when this shadow fleet is not allowed into the seas of certain countries, then, of course, Russian military machine is suffering. So these sanctions and these attempts at stopping the shadow fleet is what actually works right now when we don't see, or while I would say, we don't see enough sanctions or enough, let's say, push on those countries that are actually sponsoring Russian military and sponsoring Russian economy, as India and China.
And taking us back to the EPC summit, sorry to jump around with all these events that have been happening lately for you. Why is Hungary blocking tougher EU action on Russian oil and gas?
It looks like we are, again, we have to take into consideration the real economic disproportion or economic differences within the European Union. And of course, as we've heard also from President Trump, who said that, okay, we should not blame those countries that are buying Russian oil that cannot afford to buy oil someplace else. Being in Lithuania, I know that the Baltic states that understood the danger of buying resources from Russia way before than anyone else in the European Union, the Baltic states took many years to get rid of buying Russian resources. They are not buying Russian resources right now, but they've been preparing for it for quite a while. So some countries in the European Union cannot really afford to buy it anywhere else, and they have the pipes right now, the pipe that is working right now, and that is working to their benefit. And also the oil that they're getting through that pipe from Russia. They use some of it, and some of it they're reselling to European Union partners. So this is why they are blocking it, because as of now, they don't have a full plan to stop buying Russian oil right now, today in 2025, although they have a plan to stop buying it in 2027. But this will take us 2 years to actually, for those European countries to get rid of buying of Russian oil, Russian resources. So right now they're asking not to make them because financially this would be a catastrophic strain on their economy.
I'm just going to finish by looping around to where we started. I want to touch on EU accession. If Ukraine were to join the EU and other countries, for instance, Montenegro was also vocal about their desire at this EPC summit, would this make Europe safer or provoke Russia further?
Well, as the Kremlin said, they have nothing against Ukraine joining the European Union, because, again, they see the European Union not as a military alliance, but merely as an economic or a political alliance that has nothing to do with the military. But if we will see more military buildup within the European Union, and I think we will see that, especially with the Trump administration in power, and we understand that NATO is very reliant on the United States. So if the European Union will become more a military alliance, not just an economic and political alliance, then maybe Kremlin would have something to say about it. As of now, Kremlin is signaling that they have nothing against Ukraine joining the European Union. So this would make Ukraine, of course, more safe, and this would get rid of some barriers for Ukrainian economy to actually being revived after the full-scale invasion, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and that would definitely help Ukraine, and that would make it easier for the European Union to have some economic relations, financial relations with Ukraine.
Well, I want to thank you and stop you there, but your insights are greatly appreciated, and we hope to have you again on soon.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Now to a major diplomatic breakthrough. Armenia and Azerbaijan have agreed to mutually unblock transport links. Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirziyoyan says both countries will gain access to each other's transport systems, including railways, roads and other infrastructure. He noted that the shortest link between mainland Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan will serve as a transit route, while Armenia could use Nakhchivan's territory to connect its north and south by a railway. On the same topic, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says he believes the opening of transport links in the region is inevitable in the near future. Pashinyan, who also expressed confidence that a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan will be formally established soon, said the Armenian government places particular importance on creating conditions for the sustainable development of the mining industry. The US Embassy in Armenia has announced the arrival of a US Customs and Border Protections team. The visit is part of the Crossroads of Peace partnership signed by US President Donald Trump and Prime Minister of Armenia Nikol Pashinyan on August 8th in Washington. Over the course of 2 weeks, the team will assess Armenia's border capabilities and recommend improvements. The mission is also tied to a broader regional project called the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity. To regional diplomacy, a sharp increase in Armenia's foreign trade turnover is directly connected to sanctions imposed on Russia. Recent data from Armenia's State Statistics Committee and international organization has shown. At a press conference held today in Baku, Fikrat Yusufov, head of the International Economic Research Public Union, told attendees that the value of Armenia's foreign trade turnover has grown just over 4 times in the past 5 years. It found Armenia imports sanctioned goods from Russia and re-exports them as its own products, concealing their origin to help fund its war against Ukraine.
First of all, of course, by taking these steps, namely selling Russian products through its territory, Armenia is financing Russia's war in Ukraine. In this war, in this unjust war, naturally, As a state that supports Ukraine, we are against it. On the other hand, Armenia's trade relations undermine transparency in the region's trade, distort international trade, and lead to manipulations. Therefore, of course, we are against this. Because in this region we want to create stability in every sense.
Now, Turkey says it has no intention of giving up Russian gas against the backdrop of growing resistance to Russian energy. Turkish Energy Minister Alparslan Bayraktar says the country plans to increase gas import from Russia, Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan. The minister pointed to existing gas supply agreements with Russia ahead of the winter season. He said access to these resources must be ensured without compromising energy security.
Friday, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov denied.
Georgia is now advancing its case in Europe. At the European Political Community Summit in Copenhagen, Prime Minister Irakli Kobe-Kitse advocated for closer integration at a meeting where Denmark expressed caution while Hungary showed support. Our correspondent reports.
The European Political Community Summit brought together nearly 50 leaders from across the continent, and Georgia is among the invitees. But the Danish Foreign Ministry moved quickly to clarify the terms of Georgia's participation in the summit. Officials underlined that the EPC is not a European Union meeting and that the invitation to Georgia followed the same format as previous hosts, a technical clarification aimed at countering speculation that Georgia's presence signals a political breakthrough with Brussels. Officials made it clear, however, that the EPC is not an EU meeting and concerns over Georgia's democratic direction remain very real. Still, Prime Minister Irakli Kobe-Kitse sees the summit as an opening. Speaking to journalists in Copenhagen, he said the platform allows him to lay out Georgia's vision for integration with Europe, a central priority of his government. He highlighted his country's strategic role in regional connectivity and transit, as well as untapped potential in critical minerals, which he argued are vital for Europe's economic future. And while Copenhagen strikes a careful tone, Budapest offers clear support. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban called Georgia the most successful European country, praising its rapid economic growth and insisting that Europe needs success stories such as Georgia to join the bloc. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Now, Iran is deepening ties with Russia, China and Turkey as it braces for the return of UN nuclear sanctions. Our correspondent in Tehran, Taral Shalalilu, has more.
The Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty between Iran and Russia began on Thursday. It lays down enhanced cooperation between Tehran and Moscow in bilateral fields, as well as within regional and international groups such as BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Iran's foreign ministry said that the two countries will spare no effort to safeguard multilateralism and respect for international law. The treaty consists of 47 articles to work together in technology, information and cybersecurity, peaceful nuclear energy collaboration, and counter-terrorism efforts. It will also focus on regional cooperation, environmental issues, and combating money laundering and organized crime. The treaty will be valid for 20 years after it was concluded in January this year in Moscow by President Masoud Pezeshkian and President Vladimir Putin. As well as strengthening relations with Moscow, Tehran has also signed a comprehensive document on cooperation with Beijing, valid for 25 years. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said that China is Iran's comprehensive strategic partner. He also said that regardless of any changes in the international situation, Tehran will continue to deepen its relations with China. And Tehran and Ankara have also discussed bilateral defense ties and regional developments after the Iranian Defense Minister, Brigadier General Aziz Nasirzadeh, visited neighboring Turkey this week. General Nasirzadeh told IRNA that both sides exchanged views on border security, developments in Syria, and Israel threats against the regional countries. He added that both countries' viewpoints were close. This all comes just as the United Nations nuclear sanctions on Iran were reinstated last week. It's despite a joint Russia-China draft resolution at the Security Council proposing a 6-month delay in sanctions. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, A News TV.
Looking to Central Asia, Uzbekistan's trade with China is growing, but largely due to rising imports. At the same time, the country's external debt has continued to increase, surpassing $72 billion in the first half of this year.
Between January and August 2025, Uzbekistan's trade turnover with China reached $9.7 billion. That's up by more than 21% compared to last year. The increase came almost entirely from imports, which grew by more than 27%. The biggest surge was in machinery and transport equipment, reflecting demand for industrial and technological modernization. Meanwhile, exports fell by nearly 9%, and industrial goods dropped by almost 41%. However, natural gas supplies increased by 24%, making up about 40% of exports to China. Both countries have agreed to work towards expanding mutual trade turnover to $20 billion in the coming years. Turning to external debt, Uzbekistan's liabilities reached $72.2 billion by mid-2025, growing by more than $8 billion since January. The sharp rise comes from two main sources: about $2.9 billion in new sovereign borrowing directed toward infrastructure and development projects, and $5.2 billion in corporate loans, as enterprises attract external financing. Analysts point to larger public investment programs, rising budget needs, and active borrowing by state-owned companies as drivers of the increase, while officials underline that debt levels remain within international norms. However, experts warn that with imports outpacing exports, maintaining debt sustainability will be one of Uzbekistan's key economic challenges. It is Sivil Rajapov reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Well, today marks the final day at Baku Climate Action Week, and it's been full of official speakers, top leading experts in business and government representatives. The final event was a sustainable career fair linking students and professionals in order to inspire youth to pursue careers aligned with climate action. Nadia Jani has more from the event.
The final day of Baku Climate Action Week ends here at a Sustainable Careers Fair in the luxury Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Today, different business sectors gathered to get young people engaged with what they're doing and why they're here. There was a range of businesses in agriculture, media, tech, energy, aviation and hospitality. This session was all about the need for a skilled workforce who can be ready to lead the transition to a greener and more resilient economy. It was an opportunity to get business professionals and university students together, letting them know there are a number of exciting career choices that are aligned with sustainable development and climate action. Now, as the week finally comes to an end, I'll call on the amazing talks that were had and in-depth roundtable discussions. On Monday, the focus was on highlighting the success of COP29 and the urgent action points countries needed to deliver on. Over the days that followed, topics on climate resilience, clean energy and moving from pledges to action were top on the list. Then there was a live fashion show displaying reused and recycled material to a youth-led climate forum that helped to highlight their role in promoting youth perspectives. The conference also touched on agriculture, regional sustainable water management, transportation, investment and bridging the gender gap in sustainability. And if that wasn't enough, there was an arts and culture session, plus a climate action walk right in the city. The week has been full and overflowing with great ideas, initiatives, pledges and most importantly, action. Many here will be feeling empowered, leaving refreshed and hungry to make more of a change. Well, from Baku Climate Action Week, I'm Nadia Jani for A News.
Welcome back to A News. There's a lot to unpack in the region, with Yerevan announcing new transport links set to reopen between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Joining us live from Baku to discuss this in greater detail is Shabnam Safarova, Chair of the Public Union for Progress of Karabakh. Shabnam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
I want to start with how significant this agreement is to reopen transport links between Armenia and Azerbaijan for those countries themselves and the South Caucasus region as a whole.
I think it's a huge moment. Reopening these links will turn this region from parallel economies to connected economies. And connected economies, it means eliminating, decreasing the costs, especially logistics costs, and it means the very good expectations for investors to this region, and the interest of investors, it guarantees the long-term peace for this region. But for the reopening the links and the peace treaty, it will not only to South Caucasus, it will affect to whole Caucasus, and not only whole Caucasus, to European countries. It will create complementary links, complementary routes for east, west, south, north ways for working ways as well.
I want to move on to, from Armenia's perspective, how realistic is the plan to use Nakhchivan's territory to connect the country's north and south by rail?
I think technically it's feasible for sure. If I'm not mistaken, the foreign minister of Armenia has mentioned it like mutual reciprocal, let's say, agreement or interest between our countries. But practically, it depends. It will depend on the technical agreement, on security issues, on protocols, on standards. If all these aspects can be agreed and can be noted so very detailed, so why not? It is quite practical for Armenia.
And Prime Minister Pashinyan says a peace deal with Azerbaijan was inevitable. Do you think this signals real progress, or are there major obstacles still to get past?
The Mr. President Ilham Aliyev, he also mentioned last week during his visits that in the last 4 months there were 4 meetings between Armenian and Azerbaijan. So it means progress. It means a very great willingness to peacemaking process, which is very crucial. Which is very important, because the main thing here is a willingness to make this peace. And there are, sure, unfortunately, some obstacles, like some mutual interests, some political issues, constitutional issues, the mutual respect to territorial integrity of both countries, and etc. And it for now, for today, it's seen like obstacle for this process.
And how might these new transport connections that will emerge reshape Armenia's economic prospects, particularly in industries like mining?
Mining and processing hinge on predictable logistics. So if you want to be beneficial in mining, let's say, sector or processing sector, you have to decrease your some fixed and variable costs, like logistics costs. And you have to attract more foreign and regional investors for this process. So that's why I think it's very important. It can be very beneficial for Armenia, for its mining sector, and not only for raw export, but as well as processing, for getting much more benefit from this sector. And it can play a crucial role in the economy of Armenia.
Do you see any of the risks or security concerns tied to a use of each other's transport infrastructure?
You mean risks in security concerns?
It could be both risks and security concerns, as well as just the security concerns and border issues, like you mentioned earlier.
Sure. Any cross-border corridor requires risk management. And the answer is clear. The mutual border controls at recognized frontiers, monitorings, real-time monitoring, incident prevention hotlines, and transparency on cargo manifests. They are key points which have both countries to follow for risk management process in cross-border, especially after long-term and bloody conflict.
And could this new transport reopening, could it elevate the trading positions of both countries? Could it bring in other investors, foreign investors in particular, and reduce reliance on Russia, for instance?
For sure, it is a very good opportunity for investors. As I mentioned before, it means let's say, the alternative way, optional route, it means lower costs, and it is too attractive for investors. And Russia remains a factor politically, but the durable way to keep route is shared economic interest. Plus clear and rules-based operation. If you're asking about the Russia's perspective, the Russia has to accept this route like a complementary route to, let's say, north-south routes from Russia to other regional countries.
We've seen recently the EU Commissioner make a visit to both Armenia and Azerbaijan recently. How important are actors like the EU going to be in helping this transition?
I think European Union can add financial benefit, like investment, and they can help in building standards. Because actually the countries like Azerbaijan and Armenia, after long-term conflicts, sometimes they need additional parties, third or fourth parties, for monitoring, for helping, assisting in this peace building process, because it is not too easy. And I think international lenders, they risk the capex, capital expenditures in this process as well, especially from European Union countries.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, and we value your insights very much. Thank you very much, Shabnam.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You're up to date with the world news for the hour. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned to A News.